"It's probably Alex," Jane said to her friend as the annoying sound of the doorbell echoed through the apartment. She headed toward the hallway to let him in. With a hand adorned with silver rings, she turned the door handle. Standing in the doorway was a young man, about 18. Yes, if he had knocked on the wrong door, he could have easily frightened the person who answered. His appearance gave off the immediate impression of a hooligan or even a criminal, although he was neither. Dressed in a leather jacket, his shoulders were covered in 2 rows of metal spikes, the closest ones to his neck hidden by his long, untamed hair. Several thick chains crisscrossed his torso, hanging loosely along the length of his jacket. His face was marked by metal studs, with a small, shiny spike piercing just below his lip. On one hand, he wore a spiked bracelet, while on the other, a claw-shaped ring stretched across the 3 phalanges of his index finger. "Hey, Alex," Jane greeted him, stepping aside to let him in. "You didn't have to dress up, it's just us here. You could have run up 2 flights in something simpler. Or is it true what they say? You even sleep in this getup?" she teased with a smirk. All right, quit picking on me," Alex shot back. "I could say the same about you." He wasn't wrong. Jane, who had been part of the Gothic subculture for years, was dressed just as strikingly. A black corset cinched her already narrow waist, and a black skirt adorned with lace and narrow strips of fabric completed her look. Peeking out from under her hair was a spiked collar. Against her pale, almost white face, her black-painted lips and eyes stood out sharply. "Has Sarah arrived yet?" Alex asked, closing the door behind him. "Yeah, I'm here," a voice called from the next room. "So why are we meeting at your place instead of going out?" he asked Jane. "I want to show you something really interesting," she replied. "Come in and take off your jacket, it's hot in here." She glided into the living room and Alex followed. "Hey, Sarah," he greeted the girl sitting on the couch. Compared to her friends, Sarah, dressed in a white blouse and a short red skirt, looked perfectly ordinary. Jane gestured for Alex to sit on the couch next to Sarah before disappearing into the other room. When she returned, she was holding something large and awkwardly shaped, almost formless at first glance. She placed it on the table in front of the couch and sat down next to her friends. Now they could see that it was an ancient, time-worn stone disc. It was covered with countless tiny symbols, most of which were entirely unfamiliar to the group. In the center of the disc, amidst the strange inscriptions, was a rough-cut red gemstone that shimmered, even in the dim light. "My dad brought this stone for research," Jane explained. "I told you he's an archaeologist, right? He showed it to me right before he left. He won't be back for a week. He said this stone was used in some kind of dark rituals to summon evil spirits, and that the writing is in multiple ancient languages." "Alex," she turned to him, "you're studying a language, aren't you? Is it here?" "These are probably really ancient languages. I'm learning modern Hebrew. My mom speaks it, and she's been pushing me to learn it too. But I've never wondered how close it is to the ancient version," Alex replied. "Maybe I can figure something out if it's in Hebrew." He leaned closer to the stone, squinting at the faded tiny letters. "Okay," he murmured. "The top part looks Asian. This could be Greek. No idea what this is. There are even Egyptian hieroglyphs here." "And what about that part under the line?" Sarah asked, trying to help. "Not sure. Probably something Indian," Alex replied, squinting even more as he bent closer to the stone. "Ah, here's some Hebrew." "Can you translate it?" the girls asked in unison, their curiosity piqued. "I'll try," Alex said, and began. "It says, 'The Stone of Vengeance.'" "Is that it?" Sarah asked, surprised. "Not at all," Alex replied, feeling a bit defensive. He continued translating, Desires vengeance. Speak this. Then it gets unclear. This part doesn't even look like Hebrew. Something about 3. Oh, wait. Here's something clearer. Then your thought will... No. Your thought will manifest. The spirit of vengeance. And more. But his death. By thought alone. Something about the sorcerer creates. I can't make out much else. Stone. Sorcerer. Death. Something like that. How on earth did people summon spirits using this nonsense? Sarah asked, clearly frustrated with the stone's incomprehensible nature. Wait a second, Jane interrupted excitedly, as an idea hit her. Speak this. And then there's gibberish. What if it's not meant to be translated? What if it's a spell that needs to be spoken as is? Then the phrase should repeat in the other languages. Let me check the Greek. I'm familiar with the alphabet, Alex said. After a few moments of studying the Greek text, he confirmed, Yeah, it's the same phrase. Well, if that's the case, maybe we should try casting a spell, Jane suggested, her voice full of enthusiasm. She wasn't entirely convinced it would work, but even the smallest chance of encountering the forces of darkness thrilled her. Alex reread the inscription carefully. After finishing, he scratched his head and turned to the girls, who were already discussing the likelihood of the spell working. But we need to consider that we're not just summoning any spirit or acquiring some magical power, Alex explained. Desires vengeance, spirit of vengeance, death. It seems like this spell has a very specific purpose, to exact revenge, to kill someone. Do we have any enemies we wish dead? After a brief silence, during which each of them mentally reviewed their list of enemies and picked out the most deserving of death, Sarah spoke first. I don't know about you, but I definitely know whose death I want, she said through clenched teeth. That witch Jennifer. She's been tormenting me for ages, always trying to embarrass me or make me look bad. She hates me and goes out of her way to hurt me. If I'm sending anyone to this spirit of vengeance, it's her. And I, Alex added, want to destroy Michael and his gang. Who are they? Sarah asked. They're this group that hangs out near my building almost every day. They think anyone who stands out even a little deserves a beating. Do they deserve to die? Absolutely. If I get the chance to wipe them off the face of the earth, I wouldn't hesitate for a second, Alex said, growing more furious with each word as he recalled the wrongs they had done to him. His face reddened, his body trembled slightly, and in a sudden burst of anger he punched his leg. Realizing he was acting strange, he quickly apologized. Sorry, I just really hate them. Well, Jane, do you have anyone you'd want to see dead? Yes, I do. Remember Jack? She asked, frowning. Yeah, Sarah said knowingly. You want to take out your boyfriend? Ex-boyfriend, Jane corrected her. That jerk lied to me and left for that idiot Lauren. I want them both dead, she snarled, imagining Jack and Lauren's mutilated bodies. Well, since we all have people we want dead, we can proceed, Alex said in an official tone, having fully established himself as the leader of this magical experiment. He unconsciously considered himself the most suitable for the role, not only because he was the only man there, but also the only one who could read even part of the mysterious inscriptions. But I suggest we fully understand what we're expecting from this spell, he continued. From what I gathered, it goes something like this. One who seeks vengeance, say, then comes the spell. Your thought will manifest into the spirit of vengeance, but the death of your enemy will only come from the thought the sorcerer creates with the help of the stone. That's my best guess. Hold on a second. Alex pulled a scrap of paper and a pen from his pocket, luckily having them on hand. After glancing thoughtfully at the untranslated Hebrew text, and then shifting to the Greek with a smile, he began jotting down the Latin letters, marking stresses over the incomprehensible words. "Here's the gibberish we get. Let's hope it's not just random sounds, but some ancient, maybe lost language," he said, handing the girls the paper. "I think we should all say it together. Practice it a few times to yourselves first." Sarah and Jane silently repeated the strange words a few times. Then, exchanging glances, they said, "We're ready." "All right, let's begin," Alex said. The three gathered around the small scrap of paper and chanted the words from the unknown language in unison. Bihad tak ronan li nekwai. After a few moments of watching the stone and glancing around the room, waiting for something to happen, Jane complained, "Well, as usual, nothing happened. This is exactly what I expected." Sarah and Alex sighed heavily, equally disappointed by the spell's lack of effect. "Maybe we're not supposed to see anything," Alex offered, trying to reassure the girls. "Maybe our enemies are already suffering." He was about to say more when Jane interrupted him. "Wait," she cried out excitedly, her voice laced with hope. "When you translated the first time, you found the number 3, which you later skipped. What if we're supposed to say it 3 times? Let's try it 2 more times." Looking back at the paper to make sure they didn't forget the words, they solemnly recited the spell twice more. Bihad tak ronan li nekwai. Bihad tak ronan li nekwai. The 3 friends jumped as a deafening crack of thunder filled the air. Black clouds rapidly covered the sky, plunging the apartment into near darkness. Lightning occasionally illuminated the room, only for it to quickly sink back into shadows. Now the young sorcerers noticed a bright red glow coming from nearby. Squinting into the darkness, they realized the glow was coming from the gemstone in the center of the disk. As they leaned closer to the stone in astonishment, a bright beam of light shot from the red gem, striking Sarah. She stumbled back a few steps but managed to stay on her feet. "Are you okay?" a frightened Jane asked. "Yeah, I'm fine," Sarah replied. "It's just, all my thoughts are jumbled. There's this voice in my head. It's telling me I have to choose what form I want the spirit of vengeance to take. It's nonsense." "No, it's not," Alex said. "The inscription said your thoughts create the spirit. You have to either say or concentrate on who or what you want to send after Jennifer." "A giant snake will do just fine," Sarah said. A flash of lightning lit up the room. Then a bright light, concentrated in the center of the room. Jane, Sarah, and Alex had moved back from that spot, illuminated a small area, leaving the rest of the room in darkness like a spotlight on a dimly lit stage. There, in the magical glow, a black silhouette began to form, slowly taking the shape of a 10-foot-tall werewolf. The creature growled menacingly, but lowered its head occasionally, as if expressing submission. "It works," Sarah cried out. "Though, I probably shouldn't have gone with a werewolf. I should have summoned a giant spider or something." At that moment, the werewolf turned black and dissolved into a cloud of smoke, which slowly reformed into a new shape. Now, standing before them was a huge, hairy, dark green spider with the head of a wolf. It eyed the group curiously, bearing long, sharp fangs dripping with slime. "See," Jane said to Sarah, "you can shape it with your thoughts. I bet until you confirm your choice somehow, you can create whatever you want. So why don't you get creative and summon something more fitting for that witch than a werewolf or a wolf spider? I think he's scary and strong enough for my purposes. He's a magical instrument of vengeance. He doesn't need to eat. But the attack, that's the fun part. His web should bind the victim while secreting acid that slowly burns the flesh beneath the sticky strands, Sarah said, surprising her friends with her cruelty. Then, after a moment of reflection, she added, I know my creation is already strong enough to wipe out that pest, but I still want to be sure, Sarah said with a wicked grin. Let my werewolf, spider, be invincible. If everything I say about it comes true, then it should have lightning-fast reflexes, incredible speed, pinpoint accuracy when shooting its webs, and perfect instincts. If anyone even tries to attack it, it should immediately ensnare them with its deadly threads. That's it. Let the spirit of vengeance be like that. The bright glow faded. The creature slowly approached Sarah and bowed its grotesque head before her. Go, monster. Find Jennifer and destroy her, Sarah commanded, her excitement growing as she embraced her control over the supernatural forces. The creature took a few steps back. Then, with a sudden leap, it vaulted over its creator, curling its dark green body into a tight ball. There was the sound of shattering glass as the monster crashed through the window. Alex, Sarah, and Jane rushed to the window and saw the wolf-like spider land nimbly on its 4 springy legs before darting down the street toward its victim's home. Suddenly, Alex staggered, almost falling out of the window as a red beam struck him as well. The room lit up once more. Looks like it's my turn, he sighed, now doubting whether what they were doing was right. My spirit of vengeance, he began loudly, will be like this, alive on the inside, but outside it will be an impenetrable sphere of the strongest metal, nothing able to pierce it. In the magical glow, a gleaming metal sphere appeared, its surface reflecting the light and making it even brighter. The sphere will be divided into segments, each lined with thin, razor-sharp blades. The sphere's surface now displayed narrow, horizontal grooves, bristling with small knives, and it will be able to spin those sections at any speed it desires, slicing its victims with the blades. The rows of knives began to spin furiously around the creature. Alex fell silent. "And that's it?" Jane asked. "What more do you want?" Alex replied. "No, wait. I'll try to make it a bit more anthropomorphic. Give me a moment." He muttered something, and the creature rapidly changed form. The sphere transformed into a spiked torso, sprouting arms, legs, and a head. It was no longer just a floating ball. Now it resembled a stout knight encased in full steel armor. Its entire body was covered with sharp blades of varying lengths, spinning wildly except where they might collide with each other. The creature expertly controlled their movements. For example, when it raised its arm, the blades near its torso immediately sped up, avoiding any damage. Its hands ended not in fingers, but in long drills, wide at the base and narrowing to sharp points. Even its head was adorned with spinning daggers, the uppermost of which scraped the ceiling, leaving deep gouges as they spun without pause. "Wow, that's impressive!" Sarah exclaimed. "But it's more of a machine than a living creature." "Why not?" its creator protested. "Open up." Some of the blades stopped and segments of the skin slid apart, revealing the creature's chest. Beneath the metal there was bleeding flesh, and in a deep cavity on the left side a massive heart beat furiously. After displaying its insides for a moment, the creature covered itself again with thick, impenetrable armor. Inside, it might be vulnerable, but no steel or even a nuclear bomb could penetrate that outer shell, and it can slice anyone who gets in its way into tiny pieces. Yes, that will be my spirit of vengeance. Go now, my destroyer. Kill those bastards. The sorcerers stepped aside, pressing themselves against the walls to let the steel monster pass. It lumbered forward with a heavy rolling gait. It seemed to fill the entire room, so they stood perfectly still, afraid that the sharp blades might touch them. When it reached the window, the creature lazily toppled over the frame and plummeted to the ground. With a deafening crash, it hit the pavement, and rising from the shallow crater it created, hurried off in search of its targets. "Well, I guess it's my turn," Jane exclaimed. All this time she had been carefully considering what kind of creature to create. One thing was certain. She didn't want to make an animal, or even worse, a machine. No, her creature had to be truly magical. Jane had already formed it in her mind, so she didn't bother describing its appearance. Instead, she simply said, "Come forth, Lord of Flesh. Appear as I wish you to be." A black vortex spun wildly in the glowing magical light, taking on the shape of a man. The smoke cleared, and before the group stood a grotesque creation. It was humanoid, seemingly male but completely skinless. From the blood-soaked skull sprouted long spikes forming something like a crown. A network of elastic tendons and fibers grew from its shoulders, so long they dragged along the ground like a royal mantle. "Wow," Alex gasped. "But what's its power?" "Its power is the magical dominion over flesh," Jane replied. "With just a thought, it can make any flesh bend, twist, tear, fuse, grow, or disintegrate. It can become harder than stone or melt into a vile sludge. And unlike your creatures, mine is as intelligent as a human and can speak. Go, Lord of Flesh. Mercilessly destroy Jack and Lauren, and tell them I sent you." The Lord of Flesh bowed obediently and vanished into the air. As the dark mist faded, the clouds which had been tightly packed over the city scattered, revealing the night sky and a full moon. The magical glow in the apartment disappeared, as did the red light from the enchanted stone. Jane walked to the wall and flipped the switch, filling the room with artificial light. Glancing unhappily first at the slashed ceiling and then at the shattered window, she sighed and muttered, "We should have done this outside, or at least in some abandoned house." After a moment she added, "But at least it wasn't for nothing. We've made contact with the supernatural, and now our monsters are out to get those scumbags." Jennifer, a tall, slender blonde, the very image of modern beauty as portrayed by television and magazine covers, switched off the bedside lamp and snuggled into her warm blanket, falling peacefully asleep. She was lying with her back to the window, so even if she had opened her eyes, she wouldn't have seen the strange scene unfolding on the other side of the glass. From somewhere above, white threads slowly descended across the window, forming a complex pattern before hardening and covering the entire surface. Gradually, the glass beneath the web began to darken, emitting foul-smelling black fumes. With each passing second, the glass became softer and more flexible, though it didn't break, tightly bound by the strange web. The monstrous creature, which had been silently lurking on the wall between the windows of the 6th and 7th floors, twitched its tendrils, and tearing away the softening mass from the frame, silently adhered it to a nearby patch of wall. Then, lowering its 4 deadly abdomens, the beast began to weave its corrosive substance over the second pane of glass, and again fell silent. This time, when the surface had softened enough, a small square, untouched by the web, became too heavy for the weakening material to support. The fragment fell, shattering on the wooden floor with a loud crash. Jennifer woke up. She turned to see where the sound had come from, and finding herself in total darkness, frantically slapped the lamp's switch. The light chased away the shadows and clearly revealed the source of the eerie blackness. The window was nearly covered in dark webbing. Terrified but curious, Jennifer reached out, and to her surprise, she had thought the darkness was behind solid glass. Her hand sank into the sticky substance. Her fingers pierced through it and stuck to the web. Feeling a sharp burning sensation, Jennifer screamed. Hearing her cry, or perhaps sensing the vibrations of the threads, the monster severed the webbing from the spinnerets that had produced it. The soft mixture of web and black substance fell, partially spilling out onto the street and partially into the apartment. Realizing the dangerous properties of the now semi-solid mass, Jennifer quickly leaped onto her bed. But her hand was still attached to the sticky threads. Suffering from intense pain, Jennifer instinctively tried to free her fingers with her other hand, but it too became stuck in the caustic glue. Having learned from her earlier mistake, she didn't attempt to peel the web from her deteriorating skin again, but now, with both hands trapped, she had no choice. She slowly backed away, whimpering softly, stretching the threads in the hope they would detach from her flesh. At the same time, the creature, not just a hunter bent on killing its prey, but a fusion of the stone's power, created for vengeance, and the cruel will of the human who summoned it, emerged from its hiding spot and perched above the lethal substance, which did not harm it. Seeing the monster, Jennifer screamed again and recoiled sharply. In that moment, the last remnants of flesh on the fingers of her right hand, the first to be caught in the burning trap, turned to bloody pulp. With a final jerk, her hand came free, though it left behind the last phalanges of 3 fingers in the web. Still screaming, the unfortunate woman struggled to free her other hand, gripping nearby objects with her now mutilated stump, staining everything with red. The wolf-like spider merely sat and watched her suffering, its silent presence amplifying her terror. Then suddenly it unfurled one of its abdomens and precisely shot a stream of the grayish liquid at Jennifer's exposed leg. This time, the substance was more acidic than adhesive, and it rapidly began eating through her shin. Flesh, muscle, bone. The bone thinned, and unable to bear her weight, snapped. Jennifer, still bound by one hand, collapsed onto the bed, leaving her foot behind on the floor. She no longer resisted the strong webbing. With all its limbs, the monster grabbed Jennifer's barely living body. It adjusted its grip and began spinning her, swiftly wrapping her in its caustic web. Like a mummy, it wrapped her in its webbing, but being an instrument of brutal vengeance, it left a small area of her lower face uncovered. Its victim would die not from suffocation, but from the destruction of her skin, blood loss, and unbearable pain. Nearby, a group of local thugs had gathered outside an adjacent building. Dressed in torn, dirty, and mismatched clothes, with bottles in hand, they sat on the steps, thinking about what kind of harmful or pointless trouble they could get into next. "Hey, Michael," one of them called out loudly to the leader of their small gang. "I've got an idea. Let's sneak up to the top floor and start ringing all the doorbells as we run back down." "You're such an idiot," Michael snapped, sitting on the highest step, looking down at his underlings. "That's kid stuff. We did that when we were like 10. I've got something better. Let's jump the first person who comes in from the street." Hearing the approving cheers of his fellow gang members, Michael barked, "Hey, blockhead." The name wasn't an insult, but rather a nickname. "You hide by the door and clock the first person who walks in, then the rest of us will join in." Blockhead, a broad-shouldered thug with an unusually small head that seemed to sink into his ridiculous hat, jumped up and stationed himself by the heavy metal door. Standing there, he made faces and fake punches, acting out how he would deal with the first unlucky person to walk through. He stopped goofing around only when he heard a strange sound from outside, something like the combination of a drill screeching and a helicopter rotor spinning. Blockhead edged closer to the door, trying to figure out what was happening. At that moment, a powerful force from the outside violently swung the door open. The hydraulic door closer snapped, and the metal door slammed into Blockhead with brutal force, pinning him against the wall. The hinges couldn't withstand the impact, and the door, now detached, wobbled for a moment before falling to the ground. Blockhead collapsed after it, the sickening crunch of shattered bones echoing in the stairwell. Blood dripped from the numerous places where his ribs had punctured his skin, and his head was grotesquely deformed. In the doorway stood the destroyer, or rather, it only peeked through, as it was too tall and wide to fit through the frame. The thugs, cursing in shock and fear, watched as the machine squeezed into the entrance. Its long, spinning blade sliced through the walls, quickly widening its path to the terrified gang. Taking a few steps back, the steel monster charged forward, crashing into the wall it had already weakened with its knives, sending chunks of concrete and metal rebar flying. Michael and his cronies bolted up the stairs, trying to escape certain death. The destroyer pursued them, but the narrow stairwell couldn't contain its massive form. Its spinning, drill-like arms bored into the concrete walls, with the left arm cutting into one side while the right one obliterated part of the next landing. One of the gang members tripped on a step and tumbled down, rolling straight into the path of the enraged monster. A heavy foot came down on him, leaving a deep, jagged mark on his lifeless body. One by one, the thugs made critical mistakes, tripping, falling, or simply running too slowly. They were caught by the massive drills, crushed and torn apart. Now only one target remained: Michael. He had managed to stay far enough ahead of the terrifying creature. 8th floor, 9th, 10th. That was it. There was nowhere else to run. Panicking, Michael banged on the nearest door, but no one answered. He dashed to the roof, but a thick chain with a large padlock, placed there specifically to prevent people like him from breaking in, blocked his way. Here the destroyer caught up with him. In one swift motion it drove its drills into Michael's hands, piercing his wrists, but stopped just short of shredding them completely. Stretching its powerful arms to the sides, it pinned Michael against the wall, driving the drill ends into the concrete. Immobilized, unable to flee or end his suffering by hurling himself onto the blades, Michael could only watch as the spinning knives on the destroyer's torso, chest, and legs slowly advanced toward him. The blades barely grazed his flesh at first, leaving shallow cuts, but then they dug deeper and deeper. The upper blades reached his face, splintering the bones of his skull. Michael was still alive. The door to Jack's apartment swung open as he and his girlfriend, Lauren, entered. They were laughing and joking, completely unaware of the danger that awaited them. "Do you love me?" Lauren asked playfully, for what felt like the 100th time. "Of course I do," Jack replied, wrapping his arms around her. Lauren gently pushed him away and added, "I hope you don't still love that gloomy freak Jane, do you?" "Obviously not," Jack said, running his hands along the black wall, searching for the light switch. He was about to say more, but at that moment, he slipped and fell to the floor with a thud. "Damn," he cursed. "Something spilled here." "But we didn't spill anything before we left," Lauren exclaimed. Finally, she found the switch and flicked it on. She screamed when she looked down at Jack. He was sitting in a pool of blood. Terrified, Jack leapt to his feet, frantically trying to shake off the dark red, sticky liquid. Then, like a trapped animal, his eyes darted around the room, and he noticed that the pool of blood stretched down the hallway toward the kitchen, as if it had been smeared with a wide rag. Grabbing a metal dustpan from the entryway, Jack slowly followed the gruesome trail, with Lauren clutching his shoulder, trembling. They reached the dark kitchen, and luckily, the switch was right by the door. The light flooded the room, revealing the floor soaked in blood. By the window stood a grotesque figure, a long, blood-soaked cloak, a head crowned with a bony crown. "What the hell is that?" Lauren screamed. The figure, still standing motionless, turned its head 180 degrees, revealing its hideous face to the terrified couple, and in a raspy voice it spoke, "I am the Lord of Flesh, the instrument of vengeance sent by my creator, Jane. She wants you to suffer." With those words, the creature slowly turned its entire body to match the direction of its head. "What kind of sick joke is this? Get out of here!" Jack shouted, still not grasping the reality of the situation. He charged at the creature, raising the dustpan. But before he could swing, an excruciating pain shot through his arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. 2 thick slabs of muscle burst from his forearm, writhing like tentacles. They stretched out, grabbed hold of a radiator pipe, and dragged his arm toward it, merging with the metal and growing a layer of skin over the connection. In a panic, Jack began grabbing random objects with his free hand and hurling them at the monster. But then his other arm began to change. Twisting and causing unbearable agony, the arm ejected its bones, the only part of the human body that Jane's Lord of Flesh couldn't control. The arm bent unnaturally and slammed Jack's hand into his face, where it fused with his cheek. "Run!" Jack screamed at Lauren. She took his advice and bolted toward the door, but the creature noticed her escape attempt. Dozens of strands of flesh shot out from her legs, tearing through her jeans and knotting together. The newly formed seam tightened sharply, and she crashed to the floor. Her legs rapidly fused together, flesh ripping, merging, and growing new skin, shedding bits of fabric, until she resembled a twisted version of a mermaid. Despite the pain and exhaustion, her will to survive drove her to crawl on her hands, using her tail-like legs to push herself forward. "I never thought such beautiful hands could be so strong," the Lord of Flesh sneered. It approached the crawling victim, grabbed her by the shoulders, and effortlessly ripped off both arms, leaving her writhing helplessly on the floor. Peeling the skin from her lifeless limbs, the creature muttered, "These will do nicely," as it grafted them onto its own sides. Then, with all 4 arms, the spirit of vengeance hoisted the girl into the air. Tearing the clothes from her back, it used its magic to grow 3 sturdy loops of flesh from her shoulder blades. Removing towels from 3 hooks on the wall, it hung Lauren there like a twisted piece of art. The Lord of Flesh turned to Jack, who had almost stopped struggling. With a deathly grip, it seized the hand that was fused to the radiator and tore it away, ripping off the muscle that had bound him to the pipe. Supporting Jack so he wouldn't collapse, the creature dragged him toward Lauren. "Though I was only born today, I understand little of this world," the Lord of Flesh said. "However, I suspect that you angered my creator by being together. Allow me to help with that." With that, the creature plunged Jack's hand into Lauren's body. Flesh began to merge, with strands of tissue tearing free from their bodies and pulling them together, binding them into one. "What's the matter? Afraid to die?" the Lord of Flesh asked mockingly, his voice loud enough to cut through the cries of agony. "Don't worry, you'll live a while longer. Jane requested that your deaths be slow." The screams of people suffering at the hands of these monsters echoed throughout the nearby streets, not far from the cursed house where the creatures had been summoned. Alex, Jane, and Sarah sat quietly by the broken window, the lights turned off. Every now and then they peeked outside, listening intently to the despairing cries that filled the air. "Seems like the creatures are getting to them," Alex murmured softly. "We should try to sleep," Jane suggested, getting up. "In the morning we'll check the news, walk around the streets, and find out what really happened overnight. The sun rose over the city, struggling to chase away the darkness and evil that had descended upon its empty streets the night before. As the faint light of dawn appeared, Sarah woke up. She had barely slept through the night. Jane, on the other hand, lay peacefully with her eyes closed, quietly snoring. It seemed the previous night's events hadn't disturbed her much. Sarah got dressed and quietly slipped into the living room. There, sitting on a chair by the broken window, was Alex. He reluctantly turned toward her and muttered, "Do you think we did the right thing?" "I don't know," Sarah replied. "You probably shouldn't worry. Your enemies really didn't deserve to live. But as for Jennifer, I'm not so sure anymore. Yeah, she's a total bitch, but maybe that wasn't a reason to kill her, and definitely not in such a brutal way." "How do you know it was brutal?" Alex asked. "Words and thoughts, that's what drives our creatures. And in my thoughts, her death was supposed to be different. The monster was meant to keep her alive long enough to suffer," Sarah said. "Same with my destroyer," Alex replied. "At the very least, he should have tortured Michael. Seems like Jane's the only one who isn't worried." "Worried about what?" asked Jane as she entered the living room. "Exactly that," Sarah snapped. "We're all thinking about last night. Don't you feel bad about Jack?" "He betrayed me," Jane said, slightly surprised. "He got what he deserved. And more importantly, we now know that magic, spirits, and monsters are all real. It's all possible. It all exists. Let's see if the media picked up on any of this." With that, she grabbed the remote from the table and began pressing the buttons impatiently. "I keep forgetting it's broken," she muttered, switching the TV on manually. "Oh, look, the news is on." After a few stories about politics and legal cases, the news anchor finally began talking about something that caught their attention. Last night, a series of mysterious and unexplainable incidents occurred, resulting in several human casualties. The screen switched to footage of a destroyed building. Its walls were splattered with blood, and the floor, the staircase, and the fallen door were marked with white outlines where bodies had once lain. Residents of the building made numerous calls, reporting that the entire structure was shaking and that screams could be heard from the hallway. When emergency services arrived, they discovered 14 bodies. We interviewed the responding officers. A man in uniform appeared on the screen, standing in front of the wrecked entrance, dismissing various theories. The idea of a terrorist attack was ruled out due to the lack of explosive fragments, and the theory of an earthquake was dismissed since it only affected one building, and no earthquake could cause such bizarre damage. The officer also mentioned that many of the bodies appeared to have been sliced with extremely fine blades, and one victim found on the top floor had been, in the reporter's words, ground into mincemeat. Around the same time, another horrific event took place on the next street over. A woman living on the 6th floor called the police after hearing a heart-wrenching scream from the neighboring apartment. However, since all the emergency units were responding to other calls, the police didn't arrive until morning. The camera then cut to scenes of the building, the stairwell, and parts of the apartment with some heavily filtered images, though the dark red hues beneath the pixelated filters hinted at the gruesome reality. The reporter detailed the discovery of a mutilated body, nearly a bare skeleton lying in a pool of blood, but the portion of the face from the mouth to the chin was left almost untouched. The people interviewed on screen proposed various outlandish theories. And we have just received information about 2 more strange and unexplainable deaths. Carl, a friend of the deceased, arrived at their apartment this morning. The door was unlocked. When he entered, he was greeted by a horrifying sight. Our correspondent is on the scene. the reporter appeared in front of the apartment entrance, which was cordoned off by the police. He hadn't been allowed inside. Neither the police nor the medical personnel have offered any detailed comments. However, based on their accounts, we can piece together a disturbing picture, no matter how absurd it may sound. Inside the apartment, half of which was drenched in blood, the authorities found what can only be described as a massive, tightly fused hunk of flesh, in which some parts of human bodies were still recognizable. As difficult as it is to believe, the medical team didn't declare death until 20 minutes after arriving, meaning that this lump, presumed to have been formed from at least 2 people's body parts, was still partially alive and faintly moving. "Jane, you're a terrifying person," Sarah said. "You've outdone us all in cruelty." "They deserved it," Jane muttered. Then, noticing Sarah's disapproving look, she added, "Maybe I went a little overboard. Listen, why don't you guys stay here with me? After everything that's happened, I don't feel like being alone." "Of course," Sarah replied. "I wouldn't want to be alone right now either. I'd be happy to stay. What about you, Alex?" "I just need to stop by somewhere real quick, but I'll be back after that," he said, putting on his spiked leather jacket. "I'll be fast, I promise." With those words, Alex left. After crossing a few streets and taking care of his errands, Alex was heading back to Jane's apartment when he suddenly heard a strange whirring sound coming from a narrow alley. He peered into the dark space between 2 tall buildings, which was dim even during the day. A homeless man, who had long claimed the alley's trash can as his own, came hurtling toward Alex, screaming, "Run! He's coming!" The old man, glancing over his shoulder, ran blindly and collided with Alex, nearly knocking him over. Grabbing the chains on Alex's jacket with his dirty hands, the wild-eyed man shouted, "Get out of here! He killed him! He killed him! Run!" When the homeless man realized that Alex wasn't going to follow him, he took off, sprinting down the street. The increasingly familiar whirring sound grew louder, and out of the darkness emerged the destroyer, its deadly propellers spraying fresh blood as it advanced. Alex couldn't believe his eyes. He didn't want to believe them. The spirit of vengeance was supposed to vanish once it had completed its task. But here it was, and worse yet, it was still killing people. "Stop, destroyer!" Alex shouted, bravely stepping into the path of the monstrous machine. "Why are you doing this? Stop immediately!" He hoped the creature would obey the one whose imagination had created it. For a moment, the destroyer paused. Then, after a brief hesitation, its blades began to spin again, and it charged toward Alex. He leaped to the side, ready to flee, but he quickly realized the machine wasn't targeting him. It continued its pursuit of the unfortunate homeless man. The spirit couldn't harm its creator, but it had been designed to eliminate anything in its way. But what was its goal now? Alex hurried back to Jane's apartment to tell the others what had happened. Bursting into the apartment, Alex began breathlessly, "You won't believe what just happened." But he stopped short when he saw Sarah and Jane, their eyes fixed on the television screen. "I think we do," Sarah said sadly. "Our creatures are still out there killing. The news just reported more mutilated bodies found all over the city, burned with an unknown acid, sliced into pieces by blades, and deformed by the Lord's magic. Someone even caught my werewolf spider on a cell phone camera. What happened?" "I don't know. I didn't see anything on the stone about recalling the spirits. Apparently, they're not leaving on their own," Alex replied. "I'll run home and grab my dictionary to see if I missed anything." He left and returned 10 minutes later, a book in hand. Without saying a word, he sat on the couch, where the stone still lay on the table, and began carefully studying the inscriptions. He sat for an hour, jotting down notes, crossing things out and rewriting. Meanwhile, the girls sat quietly in the kitchen talking in hushed tones to avoid disturbing him. Finally, Alex emerged and announced, "I'm an idiot." He paused for a moment before continuing. "I rushed through the translation last time, irresponsibly skimming over the last few lines. I only understood a few words and pieced them together in a way that made sense to me." Jane and Sarah listened closely as Alex pulled a crumpled sheet of paper from his pocket and began reading. "Here's the translation, with the unfamiliar words accounted for this time. But his death, likely meaning the spirits, not the victims, will only occur from the sorcerer's thought, through the power created by the stone. But in that moment, the sorcerer may also die. Speak." And then the same incantation is repeated. Do you understand? The spirits won't leave on their own. They'll keep killing over and over until we stop them. So we have to say the incantation again to bring our ideas of how to destroy the monsters to life, but in doing so we might die ourselves. "Is that what you're saying?" Sarah asked. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Alex confirmed. "Why should we risk it?" Jane chimed in. "Let our creatures live. Let them kill. What good is this world anyway? Let it all go to hell. Look, I'm not afraid of death, but I'm certainly not going to die for the sake of humanity." "What's wrong with you?" "Don't you feel any guilt?" Alex exclaimed. "We're the reason these hellish creatures are roaming the earth, brutally killing anyone they come across. We have to destroy them, even if it costs us our own lives." He was about to launch into a deeper moral argument, but Sarah stopped him. "Listen, Jane," Sarah said. "I understand what you're saying, that you don't care about other people's lives. I won't even remind you of the danger these creatures pose to our friends and family. But that's not the point. You were the one who once told me that death should be beautiful. Maybe not easy, not quick, but beautiful. Because we only die once. Afterward, we enter eternity. And it won't matter if we lived for 20, 50, or 100 years. All of that will feel like a fleeting moment. So wouldn't it be better to face a death that brings down a terrible monster and saves humanity?" Sarah reasoned. Jane sat in silence for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe you're right. After all, I've already achieved the one thing I thought gave my life meaning. We encountered the supernatural, we summoned it, and we commanded it. Now, as true masters of this power, we must regain control, fully dominate it, and send it back to where it came from. And after that, having proven our mastery over a force capable of destroying the world, we can leave this world with dignity, a world where we could never rise any higher. Let's recite the incantation." Once again, the group of amateur sorcerers gathered around the enchanted stone. The fateful words were spoken 3 times, just as before. The stone glowed red for a brief moment, then dimmed. "Is that it?" Sarah asked, surprised. "Are the creatures dead? Are we still alive?" "I don't think so," Alex replied. "I have this feeling that the real test is still ahead of us." Their thoughts were interrupted by another round of screams from the shattered window. Looking outside, Alex saw 3 people running for their lives from Sarah's monstrous spider-werewolf hybrid. "Damn, it didn't work," he shouted in frustration, hitting the window frame. But there was no expected bang. Alex felt as though his hand had passed straight through the frame. "Did you see that?" he asked the girls. They shook their heads. At that moment, both Sarah and Jane were watching the spider monster as it expertly leaped through the air, chasing its prey. Momentarily distracted by Alex's question, they quickly returned their attention to the horrific scene outside. "Look at how high it can jump!" Sarah exclaimed with a strange mix of admiration and guilt, briefly forgetting about her remorse over the monster's victims as she pointed at the creature. At that very moment, a small flame flickered at the tip of her finger, no bigger than the flame of a candle or lighter. Terrified by the unexpected fire, Sarah tried to extinguish it, but the flame only grew stronger, though it caused her no pain. Panicking, she ran around the room, shouting and begging someone to bring her water. Alex rushed to the kitchen, grabbing a full kettle, but his hand passed right through it. He tried again, twice, but couldn't grip the metal handle. Stopping for a second, he reached again, and finally felt the kettle solidify in his grasp. Rushing back into the room, he managed to stop Sarah long enough to douse her finger in water. At last, the flame went out. Sarah stared at her finger in shock. It wasn't burned, but her nail was significantly shorter. Small bits of it clung to her skin, resembling drops of hardened wax, and she had to peel them off carefully. "I think I understand now," Sarah said, drawing the others' attention. "It all makes sense." Hearing this, her friend sat down next to her on the couch. Jane, for some reason, had picked up a small screwdriver from the cabinet, and as she sat on the couch listening intently to Sarah, she absent-mindedly started tinkering with the broken remote. "Do you remember how we created the monsters?" Sarah continued. "It was like we were possessed by a madness that drove us to make them not only fierce and cruel, but also invincible. We created them in such a way that not even an army could stop them. I think the stone took hold of our minds, making us create enemies that were far too powerful for ordinary humans to even try to fight back. But that wasn't the only strange thought I had. I don't know about you, but I definitely had it. When I thought about the invincibility of my spider werewolf, I vividly imagined something. I began wondering just how strong my creature was and who could possibly kill it. In my mind, I saw myself engulfed in flames. I was likely dying, melting like a wax candle as my flesh slowly dripped down to the ground. But I was directing the fire at the spider, and it was burning, unable to defend itself against me. My fire destroyed the web before it could even reach me. Now it's all clear. The flame on my finger was a sign of my power and my curse. With the power of fire, I will destroy the monster. But this fire is so strong that not even the ocean could extinguish it. It won't stop until I melt into a puddle of wax. That's how the stone's power works. That's how a thought kills both the creation and the creator. I think I figured out how to control it," Sarah said, as she lit small flames on the tips of each of her fingers, then immediately extinguished them. "But I won't be able to put out a larger fire." "Now I remember," Alex said, passing his hand through the table several times. "I had a similar thought about the destroyer. I vividly imagined that if I could make my body, or parts of it, ghostly, made of some incredibly thin substance, I could slip my hand under the destroyer's armor and tear its insides apart. But at the same time, I thought that the longer I controlled that power, the harder it would be to return to my normal state, until one day I'd just dissolve into the air. That's probably how I'll die. What about you, Jane? Did you picture something?" Jane hesitated, clearly having seen something but unwilling to share. "I didn't see anything." "That's impossible!" Sarah and Alex exclaimed in unison. "I didn't picture anything," Jane insisted. "And as you can see, I haven't changed. I'm not burning, I'm not disappearing. I'm the same as I've always been." "Jane, tell the truth," Alex pressed, "and put down that remote. You're wasting your time with that thing." "Why is it a waste?" Jane shot back, twisting another screw into place. She pointed the strangely altered remote, its unnecessary parts strewn across the table, at the television and pressed a button. The screen flickered to life, showing yet another emergency report on the mysterious monsters terrorizing the city. Jane turned it off and, saying, "One more thing," pointed the remote in another direction and turned on the stereo system with the same button. "And besides, why should I have imagined something silly?" she continued. "I'm telling you, I didn't see anything. I didn't. As she repeated this, Jane pounded the table in frustration. With the first hit, she accidentally drove a sharp piece of plastic, discarded from the remote, into her hand, and with each subsequent strike, she drove the shard deeper, splattering blood across the table. Only after calming down did she notice the wound. Unfazed, she pulled the piece out and wrapped her hand with a nearby towel. "That's what we've been trying to tell you," Alex said, now understanding that Jane was lying to them. "You don't feel pain anymore. And since when did you become an expert in electronics? You say you haven't changed. If you have, it means you foresaw it, just like the rest of us. What did you imagine?" "I'm not going through with this," Jane said cryptically. "You two can die on your own." She suddenly burst into tears. "I don't want to die," she screamed, running to her room and locking the door. "I could just walk through the door," Alex mused. "Don't," Sarah stopped him. "Let her calm down. We'll get her once we've dealt with our creatures. Let's go. I'll handle the spider werewolf and you take care of the destroyer." "Why not together?" Alex asked. "Because one of us might die at the hands of the other's monster. Then who would defeat their own? Besides, we're running out of time. We're both slowly dying. If Jane doesn't come around after we've dealt with the monsters, we'll try to defeat the Lord of Flesh ourselves, though I doubt we'll succeed." Leaving Jane behind, Sarah and Alex stepped outside and set off to find their monsters. As they hurried through the city, they encountered numerous corpses, some sliced to pieces, others burned by the searing web, and still more that looked like grotesque works of modern art. By observing the increasing number of mutilated bodies, they tried to figure out the movements of their respective creatures. 5 warehouse workers, exhausted after a long and mistake-riddled workday, were finishing up at an old storage facility. "Hey, Henry, how much longer are you going to be up there?" one of them yelled, staring up at the open hatch leading to the attic. He kept rubbing his eyes as dust constantly fell from the ceiling beams. Suddenly, a short scream echoed from the attic, followed by strange mooing sounds. The mooing continued, accompanied by frantic footsteps and intermittent crashes. Dust and sawdust rained down even more heavily from the rotting beams. "Henry, what's going on up there?" the worker called out, confused, barely looking up. The rotting boards couldn't handle another impact, and the thrashing worker on the attic floor crashed through, falling 5 feet to the concrete below. His colleague rushed over to him. Henry was still convulsing, flailing like a fish out of water, continuing to emit muffled sounds. "Henry, what happened?" the worker screamed, holding his friend's wrists, trying to pull his hands away from his face, where they seemed glued. Only now did the worker notice that Henry's entire face was covered in a strange white substance, mixed with blood in some places. A white thread shot down from the hole in the ceiling and stuck to the uninjured worker's back, yanking him upward. His blood-curdling scream brought the other 3 workers running. They gathered around the corpse on the floor, looking up into the dark void of the attic. A dark green mass suddenly dropped from above. It landed gracefully on flexible legs, and in an instant, the creature turned one of the 3 men into a helpless white cocoon. The monster was about to attack the remaining 2 when a familiar voice stopped it. "Stop!" Sarah shouted as she entered the warehouse and saw the horrific scene. "Don't touch them!" The creature froze in place for a moment, and in that time, the shocked workers, finally realizing the danger, bolted. The spider werewolf remained still for a moment longer, then began aiming at the fleeing men with 2 of its 4 abdomens. A brilliant burst of flame shot across the warehouse, blocking the web threads, instantly turning them into a thick black goo that splattered onto the floor. Sarah stood with her hand outstretched, engulfed in fire. The monster, which had no intention of attacking its creator, realized her hostile intent and aimed all 4 of its deadly weapons at her, releasing a barrage of corrosive adhesive. The threads touched her clothing for a split second before turning black and scattering in all directions. Now, Sarah resembled a massive torch. Flames poured from every inch of her skin. She wore no clothes anymore, but it was as if she were dressed. Her skin, melting like wax, hung from her body like a long, draping cloak. Sarah advanced on the creature. The spider werewolf began to retreat, firing webs at the flaming girl. But none of the threads reached her, unable to penetrate the barrier of fire. Cornered, the monster began climbing the wall, trying to escape from its relentless pursuer. Realizing that if the beast made it out of the building, she wouldn't be able to catch it, Sarah unleashed a powerful burst of fire, severing one of her flaming arms at the shoulder. Grabbing the detached limb with her remaining hand, she hurled it at the creature. The arm struck the monster's shell and spread across its body as a searing liquid fire. Clinging to the wall with 2 of its legs, the monster tried to shake off the flames with the other 2, but the fire spread quickly across its entire body. Burning liquid poured through its bursting eyes, seeping into the creature's insides. The monster fell from the wall. A wide street was soaked in blood. In the middle of the horrific battlefield stood the destroyer. As if celebrating its victory, it tossed whole bodies into the air, and with its whirling blades, sent bloody fountains spraying toward the sky. Striding through the carnage came a young man in a spiked leather jacket. He walked through the piles of corpses without even looking down, his feet passing through the bodies as if they weren't there. "I've come to kill you, Destroyer," Alex said as he approached the steel giant. The blades on the Destroyer's body spun into action, and it charged at its smaller opponent, ready to tear him apart. But when it reached Alex, the monster passed right through him, crashing to the bloody road, tearing up and scattering the asphalt. The Destroyer turned and tried again to kill Alex. This time, missing once more, it punched a huge hole through a nearby building. The exhausted monster charged over and over, but each time it passed through Alex's nearly intangible body. Realizing the futility of its attacks, the creature changed tactics. Standing close to Alex, it swung its blades once more, but they couldn't touch his form. Alex stepped even closer to the bewildered creature, reached out his hand, and pushed it through the Destroyer's armor. Materializing his hand only at the wrist, Alex grasped the beating heart of his creation. Using his other hand, he plunged it into the monster and ripped the arteries connected to the heart with a powerful pull. The Destroyer shuddered, its spinning blades slowing. Clutching its chest with both hands, it collapsed to the ground. Alex finally arrived back at Jane's house. He made his way to the correct floor, and without bothering to open the door, he simply passed through it. Just moments before, the young man had spent 10 minutes trying to enter the building. His hand had kept slipping through the door handle, and only after a monumental effort of will had he managed to open it. Only then had he realized that the door wasn't actually an obstacle for him. Approaching Jane's apartment, he heard a familiar voice call out to him from behind. It was Sarah, still engulfed in flames. Along the way, she had tried to douse herself by pouring whatever water she could find over her burning body. Thanks to that, she had managed to partially extinguish the flames. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been alive. Alex was horrified by the sight of her. Missing an arm, her body deformed and riddled with scars and craters, shockingly thin. dressed only in the hardened wax of her own melted skin, which draped over her lower body like a long skirt. Her shoulders and head, covered in melted hair, still flickered with destructive fire. "My monster is dead," Sarah said, brushing a large drop of skin away from her eye. "The destroyer is too," Alex replied, then passed through the wall. Using an immense effort to solidify the atoms of his hand, Alex managed to slide the latch and let Sarah into the apartment. Once inside, they were surprised by what they saw. None of the electronics, the TV, the stereo, the refrigerator had survived. Instead, pieces of these appliances and shards of their plastic casings littered the floor. A door opened, and Jane emerged from her room. She was wearing a robe stained with dirt, soot, oil, and blood. Her hair had been messily hacked off. On her head was a metal headband with a blinking light and several wires that ran directly under her skin. Her entire left arm was wrapped in a dirty bedsheet. "I've made up my mind," she said solemnly to her confused friends. "Everyone dies eventually. I decided that before I go, I want to become something no one has ever been or will ever be, even at this cost. I realized my tragedy is actually my gift. I can't live with it, but I can die with dignity. Let's go," she said, leading them back into her room. Following her inside, they were greeted by a strange sight. The room was filled with wires, gears, and pipes. In one corner lay a small pile of bloody flesh. On the bed were odd items. They looked like armor, or more likely parts of an exoskeleton, though they didn't seem like they could provide protection. A mechanical arm, 2 legs, and a torso, all disjointed, lay there, composed of tubes connected by intricate mechanisms. "You're going to wear this?" Sarah asked in disbelief. "It's too small, even for you. You couldn't even fit your arm in one of those legs." "In the fight against the Lord of Flesh, I don't need to wear anything over my body," Jane replied. "After all, flesh is under his control. I need to rid myself of it and find a replacement. The only part of the body the creature can't control is bone." With that, she unwrapped the bandages from her left arm and extended it. It was a mechanical arm like the one on the bed, but built around Jane's bones. Metal tubes encased her shoulder, forearm, hand, and each finger, matching her bones perfectly. "I've cut all the flesh off my arm. I can't feel pain anymore, and the muscle is barely attached to the bone anyway. At first I was worried I'd have to boil myself," Jane explained. "The stone gave me extensive knowledge, which helped me create all of this. It moves like a real arm, controlled remotely for now, but once I replace my entire body, I'll switch to a more reliable system." "Sarah," she turned to her friend, "please help me. As for you, Alex, I'm going to ask you to leave. There's no point in a ghost hanging around, and I don't want you to see this." Obediently, Alex disappeared into the wall. "How much longer?" he called out after a few hours. "We're not done yet," came the reply. "But you can come in. Everything you shouldn't see has already been cut away." Tired of waiting, Alex slipped into the room. The entire place was drenched in blood and littered with small pieces of flesh. Sarah, now even more melted, sat on the bed holding a strange box with 2 tubes, each containing a lens, connected by numerous wires. Jane sat beside her, though what sat there was more of a skeleton encased in metal. Her limbs were bones reinforced with steel rods. Her chest was ribs connected by a complex but highly flexible system of pistons. Her spine was bolted to a flexible frame. Under Jane's ribs, above the pelvic bone, was a significantly modified car battery taken from her father's vehicle. Her bare skull was exposed. Part of it had been sawed off. Lying next to the bed on the floor was her brain. From the box Sarah was holding came Jane's voice. "Now carefully insert the box into the skull. so that the cameras fit into the eye sockets. Following these and the subsequent instructions, Sarah placed the electronic brain into Jane's head, threading the wires through drilled holes and securing them to the skull's surface with tape. Then, she replaced the bone lid and screwed it shut. Finally, the procedure was done. Jane stood up, walked back and forth across the room, jumped around, and performed various movements to make sure that the technology wouldn't fail her at a critical moment in the upcoming battle. "The Lord of Flesh is no more dangerous to me than an ordinary human now," her voice echoed from inside the skull. "Then let's go find him," Alex said. "You really think?" Jane snapped. "I'm going out looking like this?" With that, she stepped out onto the balcony and returned holding a makeshift wig, carefully crafted from her own hair. Imagining how she would destroy the creature, Jane had envisioned herself with hair still on her head, and the stone had taught her how to attach the hair properly to a fabric base. She covered her skull with glue and put the wig on. Over the metal-bound ribs, Jane slipped on a black, long-sleeved blouse, her favorite corset, which cinched her rigid torso tightly, accentuating the bony shape beneath. She donned a lace skirt, sewn onto a crooked hoop that attached perfectly to her pelvic bones. She looked in the mirror and said, "Now I'm ready." Jane then rolled up her sleeve and checked a small screen mounted on her metal arm. A rotating, compass-like needle spun across the screen, with a fluctuating number in the center. "A handy little thing," she explained when Sarah asked, "What's that?" "The large needle always points to the Lord of Flesh, and the number is the distance to him. We'll find him quickly. Let's go hunt him down. I'll just grab my weapon." Jane bent down and pulled a long iron scythe from under the bed. Seeing the surprised looks on Alex and Sarah's faces, looks that seemed to say, "We thought it would be something more powerful." Jane pressed a button on the handle, and the sharp blade began to spin rapidly, sliding into a narrow groove designed for it beneath the scythe's edge. Two homeless men were lying in an alley near a dumpster, passing a bottle of booze back and forth, watching the road and discussing the strange events of the day. A young man walked past their alley, his form rippling and slightly transparent with every gust of wind. One of the men grew uneasy, but the other pointed to the bottle and waved it off. Yet the young man suddenly walked straight through a streetlight pole. The drunks screamed in terror. The young man looked in their direction, smirked, and said, "What, never seen a ghost before? You'll be one too someday." A moment later, a melting, flame-engulfed girl appeared from around the corner. Pointing her one arm at the terrified men, she added, "That is, unless you end up burning in hell first." Behind her came a skeleton woman dressed in black, a scythe resting on her shoulder. Without moving her torso, she slowly turned her skull toward them, and in a grim, calm voice said, "But don't worry, I'm not here for you. Yet." At last, these beings, once human, reached their target. Walking down a narrow, deserted street, darkened by the shadow of a tall building, Jane suddenly stopped. "Wait." She pointed at the compass screen, the needle shifting quickly toward the monster. The rapid movement meant only one thing. The Lord of Flesh was close by. In the center of the needle, next to the M symbol, the digits lit up, 124. "He's really close," Jane whispered to her companions. "Just there, on the road around the corner. This is my battle. Each of you faced your creature alone. I'll do the same. Stay here and don't make a sound. Whether your bodies are ghostly or melting, he still has power over them." Gripping her scythe tightly, Jane stepped out from the shadows. In the middle of the wide street, strewn with wrecked cars and shapeless chunks of flesh, stood the Lord of Flesh, his back to Jane. He was in the midst of reshaping yet another victim. Jane surveyed the results of her dreadful curse. The most horrifying thing was that many of these twisted forms were still alive. A strange creature ran past her in a panic. Its shoulders hung down to its waist, and its arms were glued tightly to its legs. Above the waist, the body had been torn open, exposing its internal organs beneath its bare ribs. Despite that, a fully intact head sat atop its spine, twisted in a grimace of agony. Crawling along the ground nearby was another monster. Once a young man, now it had only a single two-fingered hand and a leg with joints reversed. Its head, lying sideways, was completely flat on one side, making it rest naturally on the ground. The remnants of another hand and leg, no longer functional, protruded from its back like a twisted ridge. Far ahead, two hands struggled to support a body with a neck that grew into two interconnected legs, ending with a head at the far end. The poor man had spent the last hour lifting the weight of his body off the ground, trying to balance it on his pelvis's legs, and was now straining not to collapse. Two conjoined torsos moved on four long, shared legs. Worse yet was the massive hunk of flesh sprouting a forest of limbs from various people. Without a mouth between them, they could not agree on where to go. There were many more of these grotesque, dying creatures surrounding Jane, and some perished right before her eyes. She marched resolutely toward her creation, gripping her scythe with both hands, her finger hovering over the button that would spin the blade. The Lord of Flesh continued warping his current victim. He was stretching the person, their gender and age indistinguishable, into a long pole, gradually twisting it into a spiral. "I've been expecting you, Creator," the Lord of Flesh rasped without turning. "At last we meet again. Why aren't you happy to see me?" Jane kept moving toward the monster. The Lord slowly turned to face her. "You've come to destroy me?" The creature chuckled. "I know all my siblings are dead. The werewolf you turned into a spider has burned away, amusingly enough, and the destroyer has lost its heart. But do you really want to kill me? I understand why the burning fool decided to slay her creature. She never understood monsters anyway. No matter how she tried to embellish it, hers was just a big green spider in the end. The destroyer was a bit more interesting. Life inside, metal outside, a decent creation, modeled after you. Quite intriguing, although to me it's just a machine. You could build one like it without the stone. So I doubt the boy felt much attachment to it. But me? You created me, not a beast, not a machine, not some combination of the two." The Lord extended one of his four hands and waved it in front of him. "This bloodied flesh, shamelessly displayed for all to see, tells my future victims that skinning is the least of their worries. These bone spikes on my head, these muscles woven into a fine cloak. These are the marks of the power over flesh that you gave me when you named me with such a fearsome title. You didn't create me as some animal born of other animals, or a machine built by humans, but as a being that doesn't belong to this world. You didn't write a story for me, yet I feel as though I've existed forever, as if I am the one who truly controls the transformation of flesh in this world. I pull limbs from lumps of meat. I give bodies temporary strength and beauty, only to snatch it away again, to shrivel them, stretch them, rot them, and turn them to dust. I am the master of all living matter, seated at the right hand of death in her grim halls. And now I've been unleashed into the world, unbound by rules or limits, reshaping flesh at my whim. I am a demon vampire, not rooted in this mortal realm, leaving no footprints as I walk, but still leaving a bloody trail wherever I go. My cloak is soaked in my own blood, and that of my countless victims. I'm a creature of another realm, yet created to destroy this one. And you made me not just a destroyer, but a creator, granting me the freedom to mold flesh however I choose. You allowed me to alter and perfect bodies aesthetically, though it's a pity that they aren't always viable. That's exactly it. You kill them, Jane said. I'm not a killer or a torturer, the Lord corrected. I'm an artist. You know that. You designed me this way. Yes, of course, I don't mind taking lives. Yes, I sometimes enjoy tormenting people, but more emotionally than physically scaring them, watching their reactions to the changes in their bodies. Pain is just a side effect. What matters to me is what I make of them. I'm a sculptor of flesh, not merely molding figures from meat, but building my masterpieces on the foundations of life itself, granted by God or nature. You can't imagine the beauty of breaking down the structure of a body and reassembling it according to my own design. Watching a pitiful yet beautiful creature struggle to comprehend its new form. What happens to someone who, born with 4 limbs and a head, suddenly finds themselves in a completely alien body? They might lose their mind, commit suicide, or try to survive in their altered form. Will their mind adapt? I suppose you created me as a philosopher as well, didn't you? But your creations don't survive. An hour, 5 hours, maybe 10, eventually they all die quickly, Jane retorted. A year, 10 years, 50, 100. They all die quickly, the Lord responded. But I agree, we missed the mark there. Your thirst for vengeance overshadowed your desire for this dark art. But I don't blame you. The stone had its influence on you. An imperfect creator begets an imperfect creation. You predetermined me to be a killer, and I predetermined my victims for swift death. It's simple. But in every other aspect you did well. Look at me, Creator. Look at the majesty you've bestowed upon me. 2 pairs of hands, these eyes, the spikes in my crown, these growths and protrusions. You've made me so powerful that I can even turn my creative power inward and transform myself. Despite the curse you've placed on me, which condemns my creations to die quickly, I am perfect. You, my artist, have made me flawless. But I see you've kept up with me. I'm not master over bone, but I know its worth. You look like death herself. When I was born, you were beautiful. Now you are even more so. Bone is magnificent. It's a pity I cannot make it even better. I became this to kill you. Jane's voice was steely. You'd throw your masterpiece into the fire just because others claim it brings evil. Is it so wrong that you gave the world a being capable of changing much of it, adding variety to the lives of people who wake up in the same body every morning? You only altered yourself when you realized you had the rarest chance to become something else. The world is disenfranchised, dead. I'm not talking about belief in God. The transcendent, if it exists, might occasionally bring forth miracles. But these are directed, one-time wonders that often go unnoticed. A couple of witnesses write about it in a book, and people wonder, did it happen? No. In a world with a living God, the world is dead. I'm speaking of the natural magic of the world itself, an innate magic, not tied to higher or lower beings, but bursting forth from the very fabric of nature. Miracles should be open and accessible to all, not a secret. Even the stone doesn't quite offer this. Bury it for 1,000 years, and it will just become a myth. But I am a living miracle, a force of life within a dead world. Would you destroy me? Deprive the world of its magic? Deny people the chance for change? And rob yourself of your own creation, your dark counterpart that embodies the most sinister part of your mind? Don't flatter yourself, Lord of Flesh. There's nothing to boast about, Jane said coldly. You consider yourself a being from another world, but I never envisioned you that way. Physically, you are merely flesh. Spiritually, you are nothing more than the embodiment of the stone's power and my imagination. The world and death manage just fine without you. They have no need of you. People, for the most part, would rather live longer than experience the novelty you offer, and then die. As for creativity, yes, you are a creator, but also a creation, a product of my twisted imagination and perverted aesthetics. There's nothing beyond what was in my thoughts when I made you. It is only through your connection to my thoughts that you create at all. Your understanding of the Creator and the created speaks to my point exactly, the Lord replied. Everything I've told you is something you would have said if you were in my place. Haven't you imagined yourself many times as a being from elsewhere, a fallen demon, deprived of true power? You aren't a demon or a vampire, but it's essential for you to believe you are. This is what made you who you are. Your friend, Sarah, on the other hand, never transcended the world. And what did she end up creating? Out of the infinite possibilities, she chose a simple spider. Similarly, I, not being anything more than what you conceived, identify with my ideal. By doing so, I rise above my role as a mere killer to become an artist. But even as I claim myself to be a creator, I challenge your notion. I am more than what you imagined. If you think you fully conceptualized me, then tell me, how many fibers are in the muscles of my arm? Oh no, you can't. You understand, don't you? The human mind is so limited that it cannot fully grasp even the reality it perceives. When you see a table, you close your eyes and think you remember the same table. But where is the tiny scratch you overlooked? You think of a sign, a diagram, a simplified version of the table that refers you back to the real table, just as a painter omits the swarming microscopic life in the air. In the same way, when you plan something to be realized, you never account for all the small details. You envisioned a hand without skin, as if saying, "Let the hand appear not as I imagined it, but as it would be if I saw it in the real world." In the same way, you created my consciousness. You merely commanded me to be a thinking and creative being. The full breadth of those infinitely vast concepts didn't come from you, but from reality itself, through the power of the stone. I am a true creator, no less free than you yourself. As the Lord of Flesh spoke, he rose higher and higher into the air, his bloody mantle no longer touching the ground. Suddenly, he swooped down and bowed deeply. And yet, I kneel before you, my Creator. I will not accept death without a fight, but I know you can defeat me. However, there is another way. You and I are one, and I believe you will understand me. We who long to be something greater, higher than what we are, will never fully achieve our desires. But we can live in the illusion of it. I am a powerful being, not entirely independent, acting only through the thoughts of my Creator. You who brought me into existence are ready to create as I create, but lack the magical power to do so. Let us join forces. Together, we could truly become like the great forces of life and death, reigning over the world, creating and destroying as we see fit. We will take the stone. Surely you now realize it is more than a mere instrument of vengeance. The stone is nearly omnipotent. The inscriptions on it were made by people who knew nothing of true magic and wrongly believed it had only one purpose. With it, we can eliminate our imperfections. You could free me from my curse of death, and we could create beings capable of living in their new forms. Its power would restore your flesh, returning the sensations you've lost, which might even deepen your understanding of flesh. We would become the gods of this world, not distant gods, but immanent ones. We could reshape the world however we desire, and I would follow your will. I won't harm the people you care about if you command it. Isn't this what you've dreamed of? You chose death before, because you didn't realize you had access to such power. I know you because I am you. I know that when choosing between life and death, you easily picked death, just to prove to yourself and others that life held no sway over you. But now the choice is different. It's between death or power. There is no dull third option. So what will you do? Will you make your dream a reality? Or will you, by killing me with that marvelous scythe, kill your own chance at power, and find yourself not only without others' flesh, but without your own, and simply extinguish yourself, leading to instant death? You can't even choose an interesting death now. No poison, no cutting of veins. The choice is yours. And if you fear that I will deceive you, remember that I think as you do. You, who know what it's like to live in constant hope for power, would never betray anyone in such a matter. Jane stood frozen in confusion. From around the corner, Sarah and Alex appeared, shouting at her to stop, to kill the creature and not give in. Jane took a step toward the monster, gripping the scythe tightly in her hands. The Lord of Flesh, lowering himself to the ground, mentally drew the scattered pieces of flesh toward his hand, forming them into a long whip. For a moment, he stood ready for battle. Then, when only a few feet separated them, he dramatically tossed the whip aside and, gazing into Jane's eyes, extended one of his 4 bloody hands toward her. Jane approached the creature. She released her grip on the scythe, letting it clatter to the asphalt. She extended her skeletal hand and firmly grasped the Lord's. "I agree," she whispered. Turning to Alex's ghostly form and Sarah, who had thinned down to mere bones, she addressed them. "I'm sorry, but I can't turn this down. I never even dreamed of something like this. Perhaps I can help you." "Lord, can we help them?" she asked the creature. "No," replied the monster. "The stone could have saved them, but it's too late. They have only minutes left." "I'm sorry," Jane shouted one last time, gripping the Lord of Flesh's hand tighter, and began walking with him down the road. "How would you like me to transform the next person we encounter?" the Lord asked his creator. "I want to try building a body around an inanimate framework," she replied. "Have you ever done that before?" "I've only made a human lamppost so far, but I think together we can create something far more interesting." With cries of desperation, Alex and Sarah tried to chase after the slowly walking Jane and the creature. The delicate bones in Sarah's legs snapped with a loud crack, sending her tumbling to the ground. Alex, panicking, flew to her side, bending over her burning skeletal frame. A final burst of light flared up, illuminating the area in a brilliant glow. A column of hot air shot skyward, and the force of it dispersed Alex's ghostly form into the wind.